his big interview. Today, my dad is getting interviewed by Marc Fusion.
I've never actually talked to Marc Fusion.
It's true, only through chat.
I've never even texted him.
I've only ever DM'd him. All right, let me send this out.
Well, that's more or less texting, isn't it?
Yeah. All right. At everyone, the Marc Fusion interview live now. Okay.
So it should just be me, right?
Yeah. All right, let's see here. So we're going to go to browser, Chrome. All right. Ready?
Ready. Ready for what?
The interview.
Oh, yeah.
Hello?
Hello?
Mark!
Can you see me?
No.
Whoa, there we go.
There he is.
How's it going, Ben?
It's going great. I've never actually talked to you face to face. Well, internet face to face.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're just chat buddies, basically.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, I heard nobody on the panel was making Grace's pussy wet. Is that true?
On Discord today?
Yeah.
I think the English guy at the end. She's an Anglophile.
I liked him.
The English guy?
Yeah. I think otherwise it was kind of a dude day.
It was a very dude day. Except for the feminists, but they were cruel anyways, so.
Yeah, the feminists. Didn't go well.
Well, Ben, are you excited to talk about the restaurant?
I actually am, yeah. You know, it's funny. That was almost 5 years of my life, and only people have got a few details of it. So I think that's I think you'll be interested. I think you'll find it's a fruitful topic.
Yeah, I know there's like a little bit out there. So some of the stuff for like diehard Thorp people they probably heard before, but I think it's good to get everything in one. You know, get the definitive Ben Thorp take on the restaurant.
Yeah, sure, yeah. My only concern is to be elder drazied here, but my elder drazi experience, because I'm so used to hostile interviews, but elder drazi was a friendly interview, which I thought was a waste of time until you covered it, and then I was like, oh, that was actually, someone actually picked up on it. I thought it would just died on the internet. 6 hours just wasted.
Yeah.
But I think we'll have a good audience here.
Oh no, that was some good content.
It was interesting, yeah.
All right, so to start off with, can you just tell me how to pronounce the name of the restaurant?
Sure. Abyssinia, Abyssinia.
Abyssinia, okay.
Abyssinia, which is the ancient name for that region, which I think means it comes from.
So I did happen.
Good. No, you're in charge. You're in charge.
I wanted to get your thoughts on this. Yeah. Okay, just real quick before we get started, I just had one thing that I saw when I was researching the restaurant. There's a real restaurant in Ethiopia with that name, obviously. But I found a YouTuber that reviewed that actual Ethiopian restaurant with that name, and the name of the reviewer was Dagny. You think there's any connection there? You think you upset the Ethiopian people?
I don't know what they think of me. I had some words with some of them, but I didn't know there was a restaurant called Abyssinia. I think there's one in the U.S. also named Abyssinia.
I think
And didn't we go to it, Grace?
I don't remember.
I mean, it's not
there
really.
Is one in like
really
New York or something.
Do you know what I would have named it? Ethiopium, because it's addictive like opium. And a lot of people don't associate. Right. You have to be fairly educated to associate Abyssinia, like the Abyssinian Empire, with Ethiopia. And because Ethiopia is a new cuisine, better just to have Ethiopia in the name, but then Ethiopium, because it's addictive.
Right. Well, would it be Ethiopium, like it tastes good, or Ethiopium, like...
I was going to have it like Ethiopia. Let's see. How was I going to spell it?
Like Ethi plus opium.
O-P-U-I-U-M. And then so the opium would be like one color, and the Ethio would be another color. So the O would be a mixture of the colors.
Okay.
So if it was, and it would be probably the colors of the Ethiopian flag, which are red, yellow, and I should know this. Green, I think.
Green.
Red, yellow, and green. Yeah.
So there'd just be a big flashing part of the sign that said opium.
Yeah. Well, actually, it would fit because right next to us was a head shop,
Nice.
which sold like weed paraphernalia, which actually I thought would be a good crossover because do you know the connection between weed and Ethiopia?
Mm-hmm.
Haile Selassie, reggae.
No.
So.
Oh yeah.
Reggae music, Rastafarianism. Rastafarians, I believe that Haile Selassie, the emperor of Ethiopia, was like the Messiah.
Yeah, Jimmy believes that. My friend that lives in his car in Fresno.
Yeah. So
he's the #1 white Rastafarian dancer, by the way.
What's fun? What's funny is I was stupid. I didn't realize the history. Okay, but most of our actual workers were not Ethiopian per se, but were Eritrean. And Eritrea broke away, and they're at war with Ethiopia. So when you say, like, Ethiopian food, okay, Eritrean food is basically the same, except they have spaghetti. And they want to do pasta dishes all the time. I'm like, no, the Italians do that here. And so, because they love Italy, they used to be an Italian colony, and they were very, very friendly. And so they say ciao when they leave. But they hate Haile Selassie because Haile Selassie was an Ethiopian emperor who wanted to unite the kingdom. So I stupidly bought, I was like, well, who cares, guys? You know what I mean? We're here in America. We're trying to sell this food. No one's going to know what an Eritrean restaurant is because I don't know how many people would be able to identify Eritrea even as a country. So I bought a big picture, or I downloaded a big picture of Haile Selassie, a traditional picture, and I put the whole, you know how he's called like the Lord of Lords? It was like a very traditional title of him. And I came in the next day and I mounted it. I had it framed, all this stuff. The next day they had turned it around facing the wall. And I was like, well, what's up, guys? And they were like, yeah, we don't like him at all. Like, we hate him. And I was like, well, you're going to have to just suck it up, So they, it was a mismatch. But I thought, like the Rastafarian, like the weed guys would, want to get some Ethiopian food. It kind of goes with it, the vegetarian stuff and all that stuff. But it was never really much of a crossover crowd from the, what was the name of that weed shop? It was called...
I don't remember.
Something High or whatever. Nice guy, ran it. He was there a long time before us. And he had the red, green, and he had the red, gold, and green. Isn't that what it is?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you see that a lot in, I'm not saying you're part of the weed community, but like you kind of are. So.
A little bit, maybe. But do you mind if we start like at the very beginning?
Sure. Yeah.
As far as like going into this, did you have an interest in being a restaurateur? And if not,
No.
like, at what point did you start to be open to it, and who kind of, was it your idea or did somebody else kind of plant the seed?
So there's two things that came together. So my father, who's kind of he's very generous, but he's also very erratic. He had, I forget how it happened. I ended up with 6 figures of his money that he had invested previously, and I had sold something or something like that. And he wanted the money back. But he kind of was also okay with me reinvesting it in another piece of real estate because it did okay. But he said to me, no restaurant, no business, right? You're just gonna rent apartments, right? And I was like, okay. But I knew it was I had the cash in my bank account, so I could do whatever I wanted with it. So technically I should have given it back to him. But, I was like, well, if I can reinvest it, okay, I want to support my family. I think 4 or 5 kids at the time, and I didn't want to go back to teaching, which I hated. So I had all this money. So I had something like $160,000. But I had to spend it. I couldn't hold on to it. I had to reinvest it. And he was kind of like, Yeah, he's like a nice guy, kind of, and then he gets nervous. But like, he didn't. Once he got the money in his account, he wouldn't have given it back to me. But do you see what I'm saying? Like, it's kind of. I was like, okay, let's make this work. Maybe this is like God's plan or something. At the same time, I just happened, because of my other properties, I happened to meet Ethiopian people. So I met one guy named Abu Bakar, who actually wasn't Ethiopian, but he had lied that he was Ethiopian. He was actually Somalian. And this other guy who was like a sweetheart of a guy named Emmanuel, which is the name of Jesus, right? Emmanuel, the God saves us. So I was like, oh, this is kind of amazing. And they were both sweethearts. I helped them when they were first coming to the country, and I gave them jobs actually fixing up the houses with me. They were terrible workers because they couldn't understand, like they only understand centimeters and millimeters. They had never worked with power tools. So, but they were sweethearts of guys, just the nicest guys you could ever imagine. And they invited me, and I loved Ethiopian food from having lived in Cambridge when I was in grad school, and it's a very hip cuisine. I think that's really is true, especially among like, college towns. And here I am in Providence, right? And there's nothing there. So I was like, and then this guy Emmanuel got married. I went to his wedding. Do you remember going to that, Grace?
Yeah.
So and his wife had cooked all the food, and it was delicious, So I'm like, and these people had just come into the country, and they were just looking for any work at all. And I'm like, why don't? Here's me, right? Like, I was just like that Seinfeld episode. I don't know if you've ever seen it, where Jerry meets the Pakistani guy and he's going to help him to get his Pakistani restaurant together. So it's like the white guy. I'll fill out the forms. I'll do the English. You guys do the food. And won't you love having a job making your own food and be so proud of your culture? And you will be really like contributing to the culture of Providence, right? Like, and so this is perfect. This is the perfect immigrant story. And you guys will then, and my idea is I'll be in this 6 to 8 months, 6 to 8 months just to get you off the ground. I don't know anything about it, but how hard could it be, right? It's relatively simple food. You know how to cook it, and you're willing to work. They were willing to work any job. And they actually, at the beginning of it, they couldn't work legally because they hadn't gotten, their visas and everything. They were legally here, but they couldn't, like, they didn't have a social security number. So anyways, I'm like, okay, we'll work that out. You know what I mean? I'll make sure you're taken care of. So those two things came together. And then I was like, okay, Lord, if you want this to happen, get me a good place. And of course, I wanted to be near Brown University because that you'd think, like, I don't know if you know Providence at all, but like Brown University is, it's Ivy League. It's the type of place you'd put an Ethiopian restaurant. Foreign cuisine, it's got vegan options. There's a lot of rich people there, but it's super expensive to be near Brown University, to be really near it. It's like crazy expensive, and it's like a mafia that runs it. But there is this street called Wickenden Street where the college kids go on the weekends, and where all the sushi places were, the cheaper sort of, up like the ethnic restaurants that couldn't afford to be right there. Like right near the Brown campus, which is called Thayer Street. So, looking around, I'm just saying, like, well, maybe, and I tried different places. They mostly were like, you've never run a restaurant? Are you kidding me? Get the fuck out of here, right? And which is smart, okay. And they're also like, Ethiopian, what is that, right? Get out of here. But then I found this property for lease, and it was on 333 Wickenden Street. And it was a 3-story building, 2.5 like this. So the third was like this shithole that a woman further up the street named Lako Lao, who was a Taiwanese woman who ran this sushi place for the college kids, was very successful. But she was like a kind of a scumbag, but I kind of admired her. She would hire Guatemalans who looked vaguely Asian and put like Asian clothes on them and have them give the kids the sushi thing. They had no idea what was on it. And she hired, of course, basically Chinese slaves to run the back from Chinatown in Boston. And, so she was a scrapper. She didn't give a shit. but she made it work. And then her son, who was like a kind of louse, like he was just like an Americanized Asian who, you know, his mother was a scrapper and had worked hard. You know, she had come from tough, but he like grew up as a rich kid, sort of. And so he had tried to run a sushi restaurant there and just failed immediately and just left everything a mess. So they didn't know what to do with it. So when I came along, they were like, oh, okay, great. Because I offered him $50,000 cash because I knew that would get me in the door. Because the other people were like, you know, like, nah. But I offered them 50 grand because I could smell that they were like, you know what I mean, scrappers. So they're like, well, why not? He's got to clean all the shit up and everything that Alan left. So I met with him. Anyways, so yeah, so I gave him 50 grand for the first year, maybe 6 months, something like that. So that they really couldn't say no because I think they needed the cash. So then we were in the door.
Can I clarify something real quick before we get too far? So you knew someone who was an Asian impersonating scumbag.
No, she was really Asian,
Chinese
but she was
slave ring.
I'm saying
But
slave
she was hiring
labor.
Guatemalans.
I'm saying she hired illegal Chinese workers from Chinatown, right? Because that's a racket, right? You get cheap labor from Chinatown. She was herself Taiwanese, and the most brutal, right? So she's Chinese, essentially, right? So you know the most brutal, like, sort of drivers of new immigrants are immigrants who've been there a little bit ahead of you, who will hire you and then drive you hard, right? And, you know, whatever. They lived like, I mean, the third floor is where these Chinese guys lived, and they lived on, I mean, it was like third world. It was like Gaza refugee camp type situation, like brutal. But anyways, they were just making money and, you know, whatever. She paid them. But she wasn't. There was no Japanese. I mean, most sushi restaurants have no Japanese. There was no Japanese people involved whatsoever. It was just a Chinese lady, her Chinese slaves, and Guatemalans running the front, dressed up to look like somehow Japanese. But it's college kids, so it's cheap sushi.
Yeah,
and they could bring their own beer, which was a big incentive for college kids. They don't want to pay, you know, for bar prices. So they get shit-faced there, eat sushi, close enough, and whatever. We went there a lot, actually, as a family.
So you actually got into the restaurant business kind of out of a combination of like a Hail Mary and spite, essentially?
The Hail Mary was, like, you know, I studied a little bit about, like, the economy of restaurants. And, you know, if you read a book, it says, like, don't go into this unless you have, like, pretty good experience, whatever. But actually, I do stand by this. If you have a monopoly, like, there was nothing from Providence up to Boston, there was nothing, and west to New Haven. So between New Haven and Boston, we would have been the only game in town. And, you know, and
that's what the reviews reflected too. Like, a lot of the reviews that were positive were like, I can't believe we have a place like this in Providence. It would be so long to travel to find one.
Yeah. So people who know Ethiopian from living in Boston or San Francisco or DC or whatever are like, they're gonna come to an Ethiopian restaurant that's near them no matter what. So it's not like opening a pizza place in Providence where you have a huge Italian population is stupid, right? I mean, another Italian place, so it could be really tight competition. But we essentially had no competition, which was, and Grace is sitting here fucking like giggling. I don't get it.
I'm so sorry. I was doing some research and I found an article saying struggling Ethiopian eatery eyes non-profit status.
Yes.
But your last name, the entire interview is PHORP.
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 All right, so Grace.
All right, I'm sorry.
Stop. Turn your microphone. Do you hear her? She's sabotaging this.
Sorry.
Please be professional.
Exactly.
I'm muted. I'm so sorry. So sorry.
So yeah, so it was kind of wild. I don't know why you say spite. Spite against my dad?
Yeah, or just spite against, like, you were to a point to where you wanted to make it happen so badly that, like, you were making a cash offer on a place that was like next to what sounds like a Rob Zombie movie, basically. This neighborhood you were moving into.
No,
like
it was a good. No, it was a good. It was a good neighborhood, but it was like a little bit off the main drag for brown kids. But
so the neighborhood was good. It was just home to some shady business practices.
You mean because the weed place, the head shop?
No, the slave ring and the Guatemalan trafficking.
Oh, well, I mean, Mark, have you ever worked in the restaurant business? The back?
No, I haven't.
The back of the house is all illegal immigrants. I mean,
necessary evil, right?
It's how you do business. I actually didn't do that, but that could come later. But like, eventually, the Ethiopians told me, like, "Why are you hiring us? You should be hiring illegals, you know, because they'll work really hard, cheap, under the table." And I was like, "Well, that's interesting. Well, then who would know how to make Ethiopian food if it's me and a bunch of Guatemalans? I mean, really don't know." But so, anyways, that was an interesting aspect of it. But I figured so. But the initial idea was like, I'm just going to put this stuff in my name. But we even formed like a partnership, and I was like, you know, trust me, like I want you to succeed. I just wanted to like take the money and then have him pay me back once he took over the business. And because this is the key, though, a lot of foreign people are very polite. But that doesn't, and so when you ask them a question like, are you seriously going to go into business with me? Do you really want to do this? They're like, yes. And they don't necessarily mean it. That's what I found. You know, so Ethiopian culture is a very, very polite culture. And I know that in the 19th century, Chinese people got a reputation for being liars. Have you ever heard of that?
No, I haven't. And
it's because they were very polite. And so when when whites would ask them questions, they'd always say yes, 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 you know, and then they wouldn't do it. And the Anglo people got pissed at them because they were too polite to just say no. Right? So this was a problem because I was like, does this sound like a great idea? Is this going to be great? You know, you guys going to buy into this? Because I don't really know. I don't speak Amharic. I don't speak the language. I don't know the culture. It doesn't make sense for me to run this. But I can get you guys in here, and I think it would be, you could see how you'd say it would be a great idea. Right? I mean, they had something. Well,
it sounds like you have a lot of passion for it.
Well, I just thought, as an entrepreneur, you know what an entrepreneur is? An entrepreneur is someone who sees like a demand that's not met by a supply. So there definitely was a demand. And I'll say, like opening night, it was down the street, blocks, people coming. And when we put the sign up, going to open up, there were people every day. We're like, oh my God, you're going to kill it in here. You know, you're going to totally succeed. This is perfect. So I wasn't wrong that way. It's just that the supply wasn't, because there was like literally 15 Ethiopians in Rhode Island. So it's like they had a mafia against me that I didn't realize, you know what I mean? I was like,
yeah.
So anyways, the big sort of drama was that it didn't shift to them. They dipped. And then I'm left saying like, well, you know, what do we do from here? So that was a definite, like, should have researched that more kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Right.
The culture to really ask like what the buy-in here is. But anyways, I felt like, well, once it gets going and they're making money, they're going to love it. You know, why wouldn't, can you imagine? Like, you know what I mean? Like I just, because I'm that type of person, I'm like, you have this cultural knowledge that is really valuable. People will pay for. So why are you walking around with boxes in a warehouse when you have this sort of like gift, you know, that's just your cultural heritage? So I'm like, well, this has got to work. Because for them, it's just every day just making this food. It's not special. It's not hard to make. Ethiopian cuisine is more or less like, what would it be in American cuisine? It'd be like making...
Indian?
No, for an American, it would be making hamburgers. You know what I mean? It's like, it's not fancy food for them. It's just stews and their bread that they eat. It's the same thing they eat at home. So it's not fancy cuisine. You don't need a chef who's trained in Europe or something like that.
You got simple food. You got native people to cook it for you. You got a market that's wide open.
Yeah.
You can see, even if people wanted to dunk on you for a failing or whatever, you got to admit there were reasons that this could work for sure, I think.
Yeah.
Especially when you look at the reviews and people are like, wow, I can't believe this is here,
Right.
But once you got it, once you were set and you had it up and running, how does Ben Thorp day-to-day fit in at the restaurant?
Well, so
how hands-on for you?
Well, so it took a little while to get it going. And of course, they didn't understand, you have to figure out where the restaurant supply store is. You have to get the storage all worked out. You get the cooler fixed. You had to clean all the shit out that they had left there from the previous restaurant, which some of it we tried to repurpose, dishes and plates and stuff like that. Try to do it on the cheap, but also to do it well. Then we converted the second floor into the upper floor of the restaurant, which was interesting because I actually took a bar out of... I found a place in Providence which had this beautiful old bar, solid like wood, whatever, and it was an old forget like a Knights of Columbus type place, and it actually had two bowling lanes, like just private bowling lanes, which I was like, oh, I had this idea, it's like so cool and weird, and so we had to take the whole thing, put it on a truck, and then we couldn't get it in the door. It was a huge bar. So we had to hoist it up, take the window out and pull it in and place it down. But remember the bar, Grace?
On the second floor?
The bar on the second floor. Yeah. It was a beautiful bar, and it kind of made sense because prior to that it had been a residential. It had been the guy had been using it to live there. But I was more seating, and we got these beautiful what do you call those things, booths where you sit back to back, on the red vinyl kind of stuff. And red is one of the Ethiopian colors. We put them all throughout the place, all that kind of stuff. So that took a few months. But it came out nice. And we had this Jewish lady actually who lived in the area who got to know us. And she hand painted fake Ethiopian decorations, which were beautiful. And she was really into it as kind of like a cultural thing. You remember those, Chris?
Oh, yeah. Beautiful. I wish we had pictures.
And Ethiopian art is really fascinating because it has biblical elements to it. It's just beautiful. It's just beautiful stuff. And then we got a whole collection of CDs of Ethiopian jazz. So it was very cool. We had incense, too. We tried to do it kind of really nicely, but it still was in some sense unusual because it kind of felt like a house on the second floor. The stair was narrow. Some of the we didn't knock the walls down, so you could tell where there was sort of a bedroom. Anyways, well, we made it into nooks and stuff like that. So, yeah, so then we finally opened a few months in. We got our staff together, which was tough to do. We had an opening, what do you call it? Like a soft opening for just friends.
I remember that.
And they were, our friends are mostly Irish.
Now, who would have been there? Who would have been there on that opening?
So a lot of people. So a lot of people that I had taught with.
Okay.
At the school, so it was a lot of. I would say middle class suburban type people. So for them, Ethiopians crazy, and you know how I feel about the Irish. So they are not into spicy new things. So they were kind of yeah, great. But they weren't really our demographic, so I was like, well, I don't really know. But at least we got the food out, and we're a cuisine like Ethiopia is very spicy. It's actually a lot like Indian, if you've ever had Indian. It's not like a lot of other African cuisine because it's more Middle Eastern than it is African. Even their language is closer to Arabic. So then we're just okay, we're going to open on this day. And Grace's mother, we had a huge blow up when we were going to start this because she had, I think, how many? You, John, and
I think Charlie and Tommy.
Charlie, 4 kids, young kids. And I did need her to help me out because... there was just it was just me and people I basically couldn't talk to who didn't understand really, American culture. So it kind of had to be a team thing. But the idea again was to like transfer it over.
Can I add something for context?
Grace wants to add something. Is she allowed to talk here?
Am I?
It's up to you, Ben. I'll defer to you. If you'd like her to be included on your record, then of course.
Well, just about my mom.
I will need a cigarette break at some point, so
It's really quick. Just about my mom. I talked to her years later about the whole restaurant thing, and she told me that she was supportive of my dad starting a business and being an entrepreneur and not working at his school job anymore, but that she thought her life would only change 15% when he started a business, and she was really angry that it changed way more than that.
Yeah.
That's all.
So when we started, it was...
What percentage you thought it had changed?
No, but I would assume like 80 to 90%.
Yeah, I mean, it was...
yeah.
And that's it. And that's an interesting quality because she was an excellent worker. As much criticisms I'll have of her, she was a terrible manager, but she basically ended up running the whole restaurant, the whole kitchen by herself, which was problematic because there were like 8 other Ethiopians there who didn't know what to do because she didn't manage them. So they were sitting around chatting the whole time. She was working her ass off, and she would always bang out really great food. And she eventually learned how to make all the dishes and the bread. And I give her like incredible, props for that. And she actually, interestingly, said that was the best time of her life, even though she worked like 12-hour shifts. And, it's a weird, I can't quite understand the psychology of it because in some ways it was kind of a hell, but in another way, she was really in her groove with the high stress, making it happen. And all the Ethiopians almost sort of worshipped her as this like white woman who could make their food better than them. Eventually they all got addicted to her injera bread, and they would come and, they wouldn't get it from their wives; they'd get it from her. So it's almost like cheating on your wife in Ethiopian culture. They were like, "Yeah, Courtney's injera is the best." So they'd come and buy it, and all that kind of stuff. So that was interesting. But what would I be doing? So I would be doing the supplies. So we went through a lot of vegetables. We went through a lot of meats. We always put the quality very high, which was kind of stupid because the food costs were high. Like we only ever used actual olive oil, and there's a lot of oil in the recipes, and olive oil is expensive compared to like vegetable oil or something like that. And it was always kind of the idea is like we're investing, and we'll eventually get the prices to catch up once we get the market going and we get the return customers. Which is why, like I do think in most of the reviews, they'll say it's delicious, right? Because I mean, we would go buy swordfish, fresh swordfish. I had a place that I knew the people, and they had these cubes. After you cut a fish up, most people want steaks, and then they end up with the ends, and they cut them up into cubes. And I would say, hold them for me. They gave me a good price, and it was unbelievable. It was like super fresh, right off the boat, swordfish. We should have charged like 10 times what we charged, but. So I was doing that always, running the supplies, doing the advertising, getting the menus together, coordinating the front of the house, the waiters, waitresses. But one of the big bombs was they didn't want to be waiters because they're like reserved people. And I was like, oh my God, guys. You got to have people who look Ethiopian to have an Ethiopian restaurant. But they would come out there like this, and they didn't want to interact with the customers. So I eventually hired, white people who had experience. And they're the only ones who actually really made money off the restaurant because we did a lot of business. Like I think we sold $2 million worth of food in our time there. But we never made any money off of it. But the waiters always made tips, and rich people tip pretty well. So the college kids sucked, but like the rich people in the area. So the waiters hung around, and they did pretty well, and they probably stole from me too, but I couldn't keep track of it, So that's what it was. Yeah.
So it seems like, so you were pretty hands-on then with the restaurant. It sounds like if there was, say, like a personnel issue or something, who would be the person to like if you had a customer complaint or something, who would deal with that? Was that you, or did you have somebody that would handle that kind of stuff?
I was like the manager of the restaurant. So if, I don't like the stories that were done, they would come to me. Social media stuff I handled. Yelp would come to me. I ran the accounts, you know what I mean, paying all the bills and stuff like that. But there was a time at a certain point. I remember when the restaurant started, I did make a prayer to God. I was like, if it fails, it fails. If it succeeds, it succeeds. But please don't let it just, sort of like be right in between for a long time. And that's exactly what happened, of course. Like, you know what I mean? Like, if it's a Hail Mary, just catch it or drop it. But don't, So that is what happened. And after a while, when it became clear that the couple that started it with us were the ones I wanted to take it over. And they at a certain point were like, hey, Ben, we love you. We love what you're doing. We're going to go back to our factory job, pays $12 an hour, and they're not going out of business. And because they had been through, they're refugees, they'd been through hell. So for them, they're just like, oh, $12 an hour? And they live off 2 of it, right? And send the rest back to their family. That's what they wanted. They did not want risk. They did not want, even though I was taking all the risk in a certain sense, they did not want to invest. They didn't want the ups and downs. They just were super happy making factory wage, having factory hours. And you know what I mean? So that was like the real heartbreak when I was like, And from that time on, I was always looking for someone to take it over who loved either Ethiopian cuisine or wanted to run a restaurant, because I didn't really want to do either. I just wanted to be like the in a sense, the venture capitalist, you know what I mean? Capitalist. Yeah, the guy who put it together, and then I didn't even mind if I just broke even off of it. I just wanted to be this guy who would come in and, sit back and be like, and they'd be like, you're not paying, you know what I mean? And I'd be like, oh, come on, I've got to, you know what I mean? Maybe make a few bucks off of it, but not. Right. It didn't happen.
Well, that article Grace was referencing where they called you Ben Phorp, I think that article was one where you said like that I think you said you had lost like $100,000 on the restaurant, but like that if it didn't work out, then you were still kind of like proud of what you had, at least, what you had been able to accomplish.
That's true. And I think that's true of Grace's mother as well, that she's proud of the food she put out. It was very high quality food. I don't know. She changes every other day whether she was abused by this, that, or the other thing. But I mean, last I talked to her was a couple of years ago. I think she had said like she was, proud of the. She did put out a lot of food that I think generally was excellent quality. Even though we did get shut down by the health department, but like I still think we didn't put out a lot of food that made anyone I don't think we made anyone sick. It just was.
Could you expand on that, what you just said? Like, could you kind of give us a look into what the issues were with the health department?
Sure, I remember that. That's way, way down the line. So then I will admit that like at a certain point I became burned out. So I'd gotten it going, and that was so. I mean, I literally worked from like 8 a.m. till it would be like 3 a.m. that I dropped the last person off because they didn't have transportation at night. And it was 7 days a week, and when I was asleep, I was just dreaming stress dreams about the restaurant. So I mean, I'm not like that kind of guy. I don't thrive on that kind of stress. And so at a certain point, I just burned out. And I mean, that was like maybe a year or two in that I just burned out. And I never really, I still did what I needed to do, but I kind of hated it. But so by the end,
with some of the. Oh, I was just gonna say real quick before we move on from like you being stressed. I was thinking back to you say that like Courtney was, it goes back and forth between being stressed and it being like the best time of her life. Like, I don't know with your legal stuff, would you be allowed to talk about like what that dynamic was like with her kind of being in her element a lot of the time, but you being like super stressed all the time?
She was super stressed too, but I think she liked that kind of a job, which is weird because It was very high stress. I don't know what to say. Like it was, you got all these orders up. I don't know if you ever seen like, what is it called? Hell's Kitchen?
Kitchen Nightmares.
Kitchen Nightmares with Gordon Ramsay. She was one of those.
Yeah.
And Gordon Ramsay would have said like, you are an amazing worker, but he would have definitely said there's something wrong here with the bigger picture. You're not bringing, and I get how it's hard to manage people from another culture who don't really speak English. But, she was supposed to take care of the back of the house, and anyways, she just ended up doing all the work herself. But my thing was when it was clear it wasn't going to get transferred over, I was like, we really got to think about what we're doing here, because we were losing like $10,000 a month, even though we were selling lots of food and we were very popular. And we weren't even paying ourselves, except that we ate a lot of the food ourselves. So in that sense, we saved money. But it was kind of like, it's hard to keep enthusiasm about something that it's just, you know what I mean? It's like, it just isn't. It isn't getting the big boost that it needs. And so we tried various things, but she kind of was like, she didn't want to take a step back and think about it, because she was like, well, I got to get in there. And I was always like, well, what's the point of getting in there if we're just losing money? I mean, it might be better just let it die. But I think she just felt like, well, we've invested so much. And I give her credit for that. But, our life was just a mess. It was just super stressful. The kids weren't being super well taken care of. That's when Grace was largely like sort of taking care of the kids upstairs in this kind of shithole place that I wanted to fix up, but I didn't have time to. It was kind of a capitalist nightmare where you become enslaved to something. And the idea is like, okay, maybe it'll pay off, but it kind of never did. So, the dynamic, it was just like, I think she was sort of a martyr. Like, she was like, okay, I'm going to keep this thing going for our family. And I was kind of saying like, yeah, like maybe we got to bail at some point. You know what I mean? And she was just more like putting the fingers in the dike. Isn't that what this thing? Like patching up you know what I mean? Just like enough to.
Yeah.
And there were all these attempts that I made to try to connect with other people who maybe could take over the restaurant or automate things so that it was less like manually intensive or like shorten our hours or up our prices. But anyway, nothing seemed to really work until the health department came in. And it was interesting because the health department had visited several times before, but they kind of looked at me like, and I remember there's a black lady who came in, and she was like, "Well, this really." But the thing was, we had an almost.
The voice.
I don't think she ever met the lady.
Me? No, I never. All I knew was there was a random woman, and then the restaurant was shut down.
But I mean, here's the thing: we had like an all black. Technically, we had an almost all black workforce, so it kind of looked like. Multicultural and, So I think they looked the other way until this one woman came in who was new. And she's like, oh, we just got to get shut down immediately. Because what had happened that night is the ice machine, which was on the second floor, it wasn't keeping temperature. So it was leaking onto the floor, which was above the kitchen. And so it was like sort of raining in the kitchen. Which was it was clean water. It wasn't like sewage water, but it was like dripping.
In the rain?
What's that?
Were people working in the rain? Like in the rain in the kitchen?
Yeah, it was like,
people continuing to cook?
It was like, it wasn't like pouring rain, but it was like, like you could see drips coming down. And then downstairs in the basement where we had like all the grains and stuff in tubs and where the cooler was, I think there were a lot of slugs on the floor because it was super moist down there, and the injera always created humidity. And slugs aren't really. I mean, it's not like they got in the food, but it looked bad. And I think there were also fruit flies around And the problem was we just didn't have a regimen for like really thoroughly cleaning, and like things go by the wayside. So it was like Chef Ramsay. Although like the core things Courtney did really well, like she would take these huge stews and like properly cool them. And the Ethiopians felt like the spices preserved the food, which is true, but not really true. And like, Western standards are much stricter than like a lot of, I don't know if you've ever been in like a bodega. It's not the same like cleanliness standard as a 7-Eleven, you know what I mean? So they more had those kind of standards, and they felt like close enough. And we moved enough food that it probably was like okay, but you just have these things like, and so the inspector saw it. She was just like, and then I remember in the back, you remember the back parking lot?
Yeah.
There's just garbage all over and not like food garbage, but just like crap all in the back. Which I don't know
old
really.
Supplies, like tools,
I don't know,
appliances,
broken stuff, whatever.
Yeah.
It wasn't like the dumpster was for the food, but it was just kind of a mess. And she was like, "It's a no-go," and they shut us down. We could have still. It's like this weird voluntary thing, but I remember Courtney was like, "Thank God, it's the angel of death, and it's an angel. I'm not doing one more." She was burnt, you know what I mean? And so all that food rotted. Almost all of the supplies we sold for like pennies on the dollar or just left there. But I totally sympathize with that. Like, we just took a huge loss, and I was like extremely depressed because I kept hoping, you know what I mean? And we were hoping we could buy the building at one point because the rent was crazy. $50,000 a year, that's a lot of money. And then we could have rented out the top 2 floors, whatever. But we were just too tired. So it ended. We stopped paying rent. By that time there was a bottom feeder lawyer guy who had bought the place from Lako Lao for $200,000, which was like incredibly cheap price. But he paid her cash. She needed the money. He was going to sue us and all this stuff, but he knew we were just at that point too poor to. You can't squeeze a rock. You can't squeeze blood from a rock. So we just walked away from a lot of it. It was like a real, just like we were just toast. But that was
if I can go back real quick on one question, you were saying that you did the marketing for the restaurant, or you were in charge of like the media stuff like that. Could you give me give us like an overview of how did you advertise the restaurant?
So there was like signage, of course. Then there was like keeping up with Yelp reviews, responding. There was, I think I forget what it was, Facebook.
Any ever issues with Yelp people between
Yelp.
you and getting into it with?
We once
Did you ever argue with anybody there though?
Yelp was interesting because, of course the thing with Yelp is like, why are you writing like a 3-page thing about this place? You must have a lot of time on your hands. But the thing about Ethiopian is a lot of people fancy themselves experts because they've been to other Ethiopian. So one of the funny things about Yelp reviews. So first of all, Ethiopian, I don't know if you ever had it, but so you eat all from one big dish with your hand, and you grab little pieces of the bread, which is a sourdough bread, so it's tangy, and you pick up little pieces of stews and you eat them. That's what Ethiopian food is. Now, some people don't like eating with their hands, but that has not, you know what I'm saying? So they would say, "Oh, gross, eating with your hands," and I was like, "Well, it's an Ethiopian restaurant. They all do this," and we would offer them forks and knives if they wanted to, but they were just like, "What the fuck is this?" And it's like, I don't know what to tell you. It's an Ethiopian restaurant. So that was problematic because I don't know what to tell you. My daughter told me to go, and it was crazy. And I could see that if you're used to just like going to like Joe's Bar and Grill, it is going to seem really different. Then you had the like experts who had largely been to other Ethiopian restaurants, American Ethiopian restaurants. And what's funny is the other American Ethiopian restaurants Americanized Ethiopian so that it was more palatable to Americans, but they took out the distinctively Ethiopian stuff, so we were actually doing a more authentic version of it, but it'd be like, you know how Chinese food is not really, American Chinese is not really what you would get in China. It's not what Chinese people actually eat. Do you know that? Like if you go to a Chinatown where the Chinese people are eating dim sum, it's not really much like what you get at like a local Chinese place because it's much sweeter and Americanized. Do you follow me? So anyway, so they were in a sense saying like our restaurant was like the inauthentic Chinese food. And my point was like, no, this is actually much more authentic and we're paying a lot more money for it. But whatever, you can't, these people. But then they have a funny thing with Yelp. They have like a Yelp mafia. So what they do is they come to you and they say, oh, we've got all these, it's women. We've got all these people. They're going to write great reviews. But you have to feed them gratis, free for the night, right? And sort of suck up to them. Do you love everything, and they ate, hundreds of dollars worth of food. But they did leave good reviews. So yeah. It's kind of a scam, right? You know what I mean? Because it's kind of like, and they didn't threaten us to say like, if you don't agree to like have this, like we're gonna like banish you. But it is kind of, the Yelp thing is kind of, I don't know. I think it's in bad taste to go to a restaurant and kind of flex that you're a Yelper. You know what I mean? What do you think, Grace?
Yeah. To get free food.
It's tricky because you do care, but like. It can be a kind of thing like dangling, especially when you don't have a lot of reviews.
Did you ever have any like real food critics come in and review? I saw there was one newspaper review of it. Were there any other like local food critics?
We were in the New York Times, Mark. New York Times. The New York Times. Grace has the article, I think. Yeah.
I don't.
It was actually a book called 36 hours in blank. So it was like in these various, if you have something like that, 24 hours or something like that in New Haven, like go to these places. If you have 24 hours in Manhattan, go to these places. So Providence had us and they said, go to Abyssinia restaurant and then go to this park near us. So it was like, see that I would have loved to put on a billboard, like the quote and then New York Times,
Right.
But I never really had the cash to
do
that.
36 hours in Providence, Rhode Island.
Yeah, 36 hours in Providence.
Head down to Fox Point and pick up an unusual picnic, Ethiopian takeout at Abyssinia, and sit by the water in India Point Park.
Yeah.
So
they had our number
what a soothing voice.
Huh? What?
Mark's gooning to your voice.
So So did you take out like newspaper ads or anything like that? Any other like local advertisements where there might be like physical, or online stuff about it? I tried to look, but I couldn't find a lot.
A lot of it's gone now, but like we had, marketers would say, like there was a magazine called Rhode Island Magazine. We advertised in there, online stuff with the coupons and stuff that we'd be included in it. You know what I mean? But it was like,
you got to remember this was like 2012, so it was a different,
I wasn't really a master. We didn't really have much of a budget for advertising, so
you also did catering and stuff like that.
We did some catering, and there was it was just there was one time catering events were good because like. For example, RISD is an art school in Providence, super elite art school. So they had huge budgets. So then you could charge them, tons of money. They were happy to pay it. And Brown University, it's an Ivy League university. Like money is not a problem for them. But the funniest one I ever did was Providence College, which is a Catholic school. So they had this thing where they were trying, because Providence College gets ranked as the most homogenous school every year, which means the whitest, because they're all Irish Catholic kids from New England, which is not a lot of black population naturally. So they're trying to get away from it. So they had this they're trying to increase minority enrollment.
Right.
So they would have this weekend for minority students, which I think is weird, but anyways, to try to court them. And so they're thinking, okay, minority students, you got Black, Hispanic, and Asian. So they're like, okay, we'll have a little session as part of our conference. Then we'll have like local food that serves these populations. So it's relatively easy to find Hispanic food, Dominican, whatever. So they come in. Asian, of course, there's a million Asian places everywhere. But there were no like Black or African restaurants except ours. And so, but our people wouldn't go and serve it, right? Because they're too shy. So this big white guy is representative of Black people. And of course, and the irony is, because, like people don't really think, none of the Black kids, all of the Black kids went to the Chinese food because Black people eat Chinese food. They're familiar with it. And they're also very conservative, like white people. Like Ethiopian is like, what in the world is this? They're high school kids. The Asian and Hispanic kids either went to Asia. So almost no one went to our thing, but they even asked me at one point. It's so embarrassing because they're like, each representative of each culture was supposed to speak. And so it's awkward because I'm not Black and I'm not Ethiopian. And I don't. So I started out by saying like, well, in a certain sense, I understand that I don't look the part. But down deep, we're all from Africa, aren't we? And they like hissed. All the kids actually were like hissing. I'm like, I don't know what the fuck. What the fuck am I supposed to say? So I told them a little bit about the restaurant or whatever. And yeah.
Do you think that prepped you for your YouTube panel days?
Yeah. I mean, I thought it was funny, but it was like, yeah, it was brutal. I think the whole idea of like treating minorities special is terrible. It's awkward, but that's how it goes. And we made good money off of it. So in the end, I was like, yeah, it's sort of just like YouTube. Yeah, call me whatever you want. If I get paid, I don't care. Much bigger.
I did want to. Oh wait, did it go away? Wait. Wait, hold on. Hold on, sorry. Window screenshot. There we go.
Yeah, these were like the substitute of the original two who helped us out, and this was Geber Hiwat and his wife. And man, this guy was, oh man, was he a pain in the ass. He thought he was smarter than everyone, so he wanted to come in. We wanted him and his wife to take over the restaurant, but he had this idea. He was going to come in real early and do all the cooking and everything for like 2 hours, then leave and leave it to be run by everyone else. And he was always trying to do a million things at once. And I was like, he just, I don't know. He just couldn't do it. He ended up taking my car at one point, we had a minivan, like a Honda Odyssey. And he was borrowing it, learning how to drive, and he was going to get some of the food and stuff. So I was kind of like on-ramping him onto like maybe being an owner. And he calls me up, and all I hear is sirens. And I'm like, what's up, Geber Hiwat? And he's like, I had accident. And so what he had done is he had hit one car, bounced off a telephone pole, then hit another car, then smashed into, ironically of all places, the refugee center that settles them. Smashed right into the building where the people who were like the refugee resettlement people were looking down on the car, and I was like, okay. So I go there, and so there's all these cars smashed up, right? And he goes, do you have a knife? So the airbag was blown up. He cuts the airbag with the knife, gets back in the car, and not only leaves driving, but is talking on the phone while doing it. And just like, he just left the scene, So I was like, that's very immigrant-y, like who cares? But like, I can't believe the cops just let him just drive away. But, that was how they rolled. It was like, whatever, next. And, I think for them, it's like, I don't know, you know what I mean? It's not like holy shit, it's just like, whatever. And he never got the airbag fixed, of course, or paid me for the Odyssey. He eventually basically stole it from me, and I stiffed him on a paycheck or something as retribution. Said, sue me, dude, But it was wild.
Well, do you want to take a 6 break, Ben? And when you come back, we can talk about the nonprofit art.
Yes. And you got to look up Keith Cooper. Providence Granola Project. He's like an amazing guy. Yes, let's do that.
All right.
Do you have any questions for me? Oh, we take our brief interlude.
There's the salmon shorts. Well, I just want to say I disagree with Daninsky. You know that chatter Daninsky?
Mm. About what?
He said you have a big beach ball head. And I don't agree with that.
No, hold on one sec. The American Spirits. I got them. Where are they? Okay. Thank you, Mark. I've been told I have a big head, though. I take it as a compliment. More room for my brain. Big brain.
Why do you think the interview is going so far?
I think it's going amazing. This could probably honestly go for 4 hours, but I think we should maybe cut it at like 8:30 or so. And maybe do a part 2 if we have to.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I haven't thought about this for a while, and our daily routine as kids was get woken up, drive to the restaurant.
Camera a little bit more, Grace.
Yeah. So this was from when I was about 8 to about 12, I think. Wake up, drive to the restaurant in the minivan with mom and dad. Go to the 3rd floor, which was like an attic. And then, so it was, well, for a time, okay, so for like the first year, we were on the 2nd floor of the restaurant because they hadn't made that a restaurant yet, I think, or maybe like a few months at the beginning. So we would go up to that floor, and we had roller skates, and it was wooden floors, and we would roller skate around the 2nd floor. And we would eat the Ethiopian food for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, unless we got like McDonald's or something like that. And it was pretty chaotic. I would try to, and it was basically the same thing on the 3rd floor. I would try to maintain order. I think I had 3 siblings at that point. And we'd watch a lot of Disney movies. We had a TV with a VHS player. We had nap times. John would always bitch and scream and yell. He was the worst. I would take them out to the local park, India Point Park. But there was really no set schedule. And it was basically just that every day. Lots of movies. Lots of movies. And I think at one point I tried to homeschool them. But it was just a little bit too much work. And during that whole time, my sister Maggie was born and Joey was born. And so I did really have a lot to do with raising them from when they were very, very, very little. And we were, yeah, I mean, I would say, I'm not trying to like over dramatize it, but we were, we were alone for a lot of that time. And it was just, I mean, sometimes my dad would come with us to the park and stuff. But it was just, we were kind of on our own, honestly. But it had its good moments. Obviously, we were all like super close, but it was pretty crazy, especially because there was just no order. But I was going to say, this lore hasn't dropped yet. I think maybe within the first year, we did for a couple months hang out with my dad's friend's family. My dad's friend's name was Andy Tardif, and he had this huge, like 9-kid Catholic family that lived like half an hour away. So we would get dropped off there every day for a couple months, and these people were super weird. They were super trad Catholic. They had a room where you could only speak German. They had, no movies, no TV. But they were kind of cool, and it always smelled like socks and macaroni and cheese in their house. But like they were super into chess. We played a lot of chess with them, and it was cool because it was like two big families. And the dad, Andy Tardif, would like whittle wands for us and stuff. And all of us, his kids and me and my siblings, we would run around his yard and stuff doing Harry Potter spells, and like we'd write them out in detail, and you had to follow specific rules. So I forgot about that whole chapter of my life, but like that was a long time. And my mom got really upset, I remember, about that, because she was like, you know, I never get to see my kids. Somebody else is raising my kids. I remember that. So it was fun though. It was weird but fun. And then those same people, we were like on and off with them. It was really intense, and then we'd take a break, and then we'd go back. And I don't know if my parents paid them. I think they paid them something, but it was kind of like they were trying to help out. So this guy, Andy Tardif, his wife had a sister who I think got married to a black guy, but he was like literally doing crack. And so her sister had like 5 kids, or maybe 7 kids by this black guy, but he was like gonzo doing like literal crack. And so this guy, Andy Tardif, his wife's sister moved into like a very, very small section of the house that was kind of like, I don't want to say slave quarters, but like it was like 2 rooms for all these kids and her sister, and the dad wasn't there. And I became friends with the 3 oldest sisters, whose names were Margaret, Rose, and Clara. And Rose and Clara were twins, and so they were like biracial, and they were totally different than the Tardifs. They were much more like into emo and stuff. And so this girl Rose, who I got really close with, she, like, I must have been like 11 or 12. She got into bulimia and cutting herself. And so one time I walked in on her in her mom's bathroom painting with her own blood that she had drained into a cup and was painting with.
Ruby coated.
Yeah, it was pretty dark. It was like, I don't know if you've ever been in a homeschooling house, but it gets weird. It gets really, really weird. People like they get up to weird shit. So.
Well, let me ask you this, Grace, if you're comfortable answering.
Yeah.
What do you think the net impact of the restaurant was on your parents' relationship?
I mean, they never had a very close or warm relationship. I don't think they ever kissed in front of us, ever. Not once. Maybe not even hugged. So it wasn't really like, oh, all of a sudden mom and dad are far apart. She's in the kitchen and he's running around trying to take care of the front of house stuff, and we're just alone. It was kind of like, it kind of fell into place. Impact it had on their relationship. I think it made my dad feel like he couldn't trust her because she didn't have the maturity to take a step back and say like, okay, is this good for our family? I think she preferred the simplicity of, not that it was like simple, but it was like, it wasn't as hard as the family stuff. She preferred like the cooking and the cleaning, and it wasn't like she was like a people person in the kitchen either. She was like basically doing it all herself, which I do have to say it was really hard work. I think he felt like he couldn't trust her because they weren't working together. She just kind of was like, I don't know. She didn't want to he was kind of on his own as far as like the big picture went. She didn't want to take a step back. She didn't want to think about the overall picture. She just wanted to be hands-on. And I think for her, she felt resentful of him, like she couldn't trust him because his business had failed. And right. I think that was maybe, I mean, they obviously had a dysfunctional relationship, so I don't, like, obviously couldn't handle the pressure on both sides.
So you think it was just more like of an accelerant rather than like a cause of anything?
Yeah. I mean, they fundamentally were doing 2 different things. My mom was saying like, okay, I'll be your employee. And my dad was saying like, no, we're 2 partners in this working together. And there was just like a fundamental difference there that they couldn't get over.
Can I ask you one last thing, Grace?
Oh, yeah. Sure.
So, if you want to answer, why do you think your mom would feel like that was like one of the best times of her life?
Because I think she prefers working very hard and feeling proud of herself to relationships, especially intimate relationships with people that she feels bad that she can't connect with, but like overall can't connect with. I think it was just a lot easier for her. I think she felt proud of herself, and she should have. It was really good food. I'm not going to say it wasn't.
True.
And she didn't let things get moldy. She didn't let things get, out of place. She kept it up as best as one woman could in a whole kitchen. So I just think she preferred it. It was like, worked for her.
I think she's a worker.
Yeah.
Not a people person.
Well, thank you, Grace. You look nice tonight, too, with your normal size head.
Thanks, Mark.
I agree with that.
Welcome back, Ben.
Thank you. Even now, I think she works a lot. And I'm hoping that can be a thing that, maybe I'm better with the kids and she's better just working, and that's okay. Maybe like she was good with the kids when they were younger. A lot of women, when kids get older, they don't, she was like one of those dog moms, so she loved having babies who couldn't reject her. And then when the kids got to an age where they could reject her, I think it became problematic and she lost the connection. But yeah, no, in fact, the Ethiopians, who were hard workers themselves, always revered her like ability to work circles around them. And she was like a legend to them, I think, in that way.
I was telling him while you were gone about the Tardif saga. We never really mentioned that, but there was a whole Tardif saga.
Oh, and then the accountant we had, he was the worst.
Yeah. We may be introducing that accountant on stream, so we won't go into too much detail about that. But
yeah, we want to bring him back in.
I want him to do my bookkeeping.
He's hilarious.
So amazing.
Just like
you guys.
Great guy, totally out of control, unable to do math. But anyways,
so before we move on to the nonprofit arc, I just want to ask you one more thing. Now, this is a ask from a non-judgmental place. Based on your interactions with Black people on YouTube, how does that, like, cause you kind of said you were kind of making some jokes back in the day when you were doing your PR thing. Like, did you ever have issues with the workers like you do with some of the people you interact with on YouTube?
Well, I mean, the basic problem, which I didn't understand, you think of immigrants as like hardworking, but refugees are different than other immigrants. It's not really their fault. But a lot of these folks were living like in tents for years until they got selected. There's a lottery, and the lottery selects them to come to America. And when they get selected, it's like the Gazans now. If they got selected by the UN to come to America, right? It's like from like the worst situation. They actually had become like most of the folks that I knew had become refugees in Yemen. Because I think this is what happened. Okay, so Ethiopia fought against Eritrea, which is on the coastline. There was a civil war. It wasn't really a civil war, I guess. They saw it as a civil war. They were trying to get independence from Ethiopia. But Ethiopia, at one point, took the Eritrea over. And a lot of these people were in the Navy, the Eritrean Navy, which was like old Soviet, like shit boxes on the Red Sea, and so they couldn't land because they were fighting against Ethiopia, but Ethiopia had taken the coastland, so they couldn't go back to port. So they actually had to go to Yemen, which is like also like a crazy place. And Black Africans are generally not seen as like human beings. They're seen as slave types there. So the guy I opened the restaurant with, he worked in a Yemenese foam factory, and there's like no EPA in Yemen. And so like they were taken as refugees, but they were basically enslaved. And so he was like, he's like, I'm basically blind, which I would have liked to have known ahead of time. But he's like, I'm basically blind from like brain damage from the foam factory. Because you can imagine just like unregulated foam production. like the fluorocarbons or whatever. And he said everyone was doing khat, which is like a stimulant. Have you ever heard of it? Khat, Khat.
Is it like a red substance?
It's like a leaf
that they put in their.
Yeah, and I guess people, especially in Somalia, Yemen, all that, they eat it, and it like. He told me about like a guy who once he sliced his finger off and just kept working because he was like kind of, and there's no safety regulation, so everyone was kind of high, everyone was getting brain damage. Anyway, so apparently they were in Yemen supposedly as refugees, but then a guy from the UN, a European guy, came and was like, "This is crazy," and he wrote a big report about it, which actually allowed them to get to the U.S. because the U.S. was like, okay, yeah, we'll help these people out because they're in a terrible situation. So that again was why they didn't want strife. They didn't want to be up and down. But when largely in these kind of situations, they're waiting around a lot. Okay, so they learn how to do everything really slowly because they just have hours and hours to do nothing. If you think about the Gazans now, what can they do? There's no jobs. You're sitting in tents in refugee camps waiting for hopefully a truck comes. And then you eat that food and then you're just waiting around. So you eat it slowly and you work slowly. So when they came over here, they did everything slowly because that's what they were used to doing. And they weren't trying to be bad workers, but the culture of refugees is slow as opposed to Asian workers, which generally these people in Chinatown, they come through illegal. They have these kind of smuggling rings. They work in Asian restaurants. They learn to work really fast, and that's how you kind of make it. And you pay the smuggler back and that kind of stuff, right? So you eventually, and then you have to pay the Chinese immigration person $10,000 to get you. So anyway, so that was my problem with them. On the other hand, I don't know if you ever worked in restaurants, people are usually on drugs, alcohol problems. There's a lot of dysfunctionality because that's people from the bottom of the ranks work in restaurants, people who've been in jail, stuff like that. So on the one hand, they were very pleasant, religious people. They were really nice with the kids, pleasant to work with. But on the other hand, they were just very slow. It was very hard to teach them knife skills and things that restaurant workers learn. Which is why we went to the idea of the nonprofit to say well, maybe we can kind of give them those skills to on-ramp them into restaurant business. The other problem was, of course, that they were a very, very shy culture, so they couldn't. It would have been really fun for, American people to encounter people from genuine, people from a fascinating culture and talk with them, but they ended up all wanting to work in the back. So, I mean, did I dislike them for that? No, but we had this one guy once, but the language barrier, we had this one guy once, he did deliveries for us, and deliveries was a big thing. It was right before COVID, but brown kids, but we had this repeat customer, and he lived somewhere on some road, and this guy put it in his GPS. It was 5 miles away. But when this guy put it in his GPS, it gave him an address in Massachusetts. So he would always drive to Massachusetts, and the guy would call me and be like, where's my delivery? And I would call him, and he was like, I'm on my way. It's 74 more miles. And I was like, no, dude, that's not where it is. So that kind of stuff, he just couldn't kind of get that, because they just relied on GPS they just had no idea where Massachusetts was, Connecticut, or anything like that. So there's always fuck-ups. We had a funny thing that this one guy who was he was a charming guy, but we would use pizza boxes because it was a big round thing. So when we're sending off a delivery, we use pizza boxes. And we try to write on it what it was, and we had a veggie combo, meat combo. Those are the main dishes. But he would write VAGCOMB, vag comb, right? So it's kind of it is what it is. You know what I mean? We got the vag comb, and the food in it was good, but it was you couldn't explain to him how that's not going to go over well. But I felt well, it's genuinely Ethiopian, to get the VAGCOM. So like a lot of things like that. So it's frustrating, but.
At what point, like, did you first start to think about the shift over to nonprofit?
Okay. Marky. There he is. All right, we're back.
Hey, Mark. Sorry, we had
a
big thunder strike here.
Happens to me all the time.
Does it? Oh.
Yep.
It's beautiful. It's been so hot here. I love to see the humidity hopefully take off for a bit.
Did you hear my question before it cut off?
Yes, you said how long in before you started thinking about nonprofit?
Yeah.
I actually had originally thought of it because I understood that like I was the owner, but I wanted to make it. I don't know if you ever heard of a co-op, a cooperative, so that everyone's a shareholder and everyone buys in, because I wasn't really in it to like make a ton of money, and I wanted everyone to. I felt like, especially since it's an Ethiopian place, but this whole idea that like people from other countries really want like to sell their culture, it's just not really true. I imagine back in the day, I mean, not every place that became an Italian pizzeria, like there's probably 20 other Italians who were like, I don't, whatever, I'm just going to do whatever job, be a garbage man. And you have to find someone who has that spirit of believing in it and, having the entrepreneurial spirit. It's not enough just to say like, you have the potential. You have to have that drive. So they basically didn't want to do it. And they basically, they want, and interestingly enough, this could get me in trouble, I guess, but I don't think it would. Like they all wanted to stay on welfare, and so only get paid on the books up to the amount you could on welfare, and then get the rest cash, which is a scam. But like they had me by the short and curlies. What am I going to do? And they really like a lot, and this is like the negative side of immigrant culture. They worked the system to their advantage. And they didn't really care about like, contributing to society or whatever. Like they just saw it as like they hit the ATM, and they were really surprised actually that you had to work hard in America, because to them, you can imagine in their mindset, they'd watched movies and they thought it was just going to be like, yellow brick road, right? And they were like really upset because they got free housing for a while. When you're a refugee, right? So you're a part of the system. You're not an illegal immigrant. You get free housing, free furniture. That's how I met them, because I was part of this program. All your health stuff is updated. It's kind of like first world, like it's pretty good. But then the system drops you off at a certain point, and then it's like you're supposed to be going, doing this on your own. And I think they were like, sort of like, what? I mean, we're in America. It's over. We shouldn't. They didn't mind working, but they just kind of saw it as like, well, but I mean, what happened to the yellow brick road? And it's kind of understandable because we give them such a leg up at the beginning. It's really like amazing. Like the apartment is there. I ran the furniture. They pay for nothing. The idea is like, take your time, make sure you get your shots, all that stuff. So there really wasn't an entrepreneurial spirit there. They wanted like factory jobs, and there was even a girl we had. She was cute, she was smart, and she got a full ride to Brandeis University, which is like a pretty good school. She could barely write English, but she was at the top of her game because she went to, I guess we could call this an urban high school, if you know what I mean, where no one did their homework, and she did her homework even though it was like poor, but she was like high ranked. Brandeis is like, I think, $80,000 a year to go to. She got a full ride. But instead of doing that, she ended up getting a job in Boston at a factory making $12 an hour. And I was like, oh, that's such a shame. Her name was Titi. And, she was like 19 or 20 years old. And I just don't think she understood like what an opportunity that could have been for her to go to an elite school for 4 years. But, the mentality is more like survival and staying with my people and that kind of stuff. So there's a kind of ghetto mentality in a sense, like stay with what's familiar. So they weren't willing to take chances. So they didn't want to do and I had met various Ethiopian people, sometimes Ethiopian Americans who came in to the restaurant, who I thought like, okay, maybe you could take it over. But like Ethiopians, there's two types of Ethiopians. There's Ethiopians who are here like on an H-1B, and a lot of times they're very well educated. Ethiopians are one of the wealthier ethnicities. Then there's refugees, and they kind of saw themselves as different class-wise, you know what I mean? So like, I don't know, we were in Texas and California. I think some of the old, Mexicans who had, they had businesses, they see illegal Mexicans as kind of trash, you know what I mean? So there's a little bit of that. And I just couldn't find anyone who wanted to partner. But we once had people come from the UN, who were actually from the UN, and they were so, because they had seen like, the refugee camps. They were so impressed. I think they left us a $200 tip because they were like, this is amazing what you're doing here. Because they knew these people are like largely unemployable or barely employable. And they were like, this is what we should, this is what this program should look like. You should be subsidized, all this kind of stuff. They were like just super impressed of what we were doing. And so, that kind of idea. And then there was a girl who was a student at Brown University, and she had started nonprofits in Ethiopia, and she wanted to do a nonprofit with me through Brown, but she wanted Brown to subsidize it and have it be a kind of, so I had this idea a bunch of times. I didn't care. I didn't care. See, if you had to choose between a nonprofit and an anti-profit that's losing $10,000 a month, it's a no-brainer because a nonprofit just breaks even. And at a certain point, I just like, yeah, breaking even sounds great because you at least can pay yourself then, as part of the nonprofit. So Brown nixed the idea. I did a lot of work with her. I wrote up a whole proposal with her, but they didn't go for it for whatever reason. Even though there was a professor, or I think we had a couple of professors there who really loved the restaurant, really saw what we were doing was cool. Maybe they didn't want to take it on because we were going to have food carts. That would go to like different places, even not necessarily in Providence, and because the food is just stews, so you can take it. You could do like Subway, you know what I mean? You don't need to have the restaurant part. And we bought food carts and stuff, but we could never get the operation going beyond just getting a food cart. And then I met this guy, also who worked with the refugees, and he had started his own business making granola bars with refugees. And his name was Keith Cooper. And he was like a really nice guy, kind of a bleeding heart, sort of liberal type of guy, but also understood the problems of working with refugees. So I was like, oh, Keith, take this off my hands, just take this off my hands. And we were doing a ton more revenue than him. So we were doing, I don't know, $200,000 or $300,000 a year in revenue, which is pretty good for a restaurant. And he was doing like 100,000, he was doing like 50,000. So I was like, well, we're not making money. And he was only making money because it was a nonprofit. So he was getting all these grants and stuff because his granola bars would have cost like, they would have cost like $30 for a granola bar if he was like not getting subsidized, because everything with him was like a program, and I don't know what to say. Like it was.
You ever try them?
Yeah, they're good. You can get them. They're really delicious. But his model was not to make it profitable, but to have it be a program, which there are all these programs like work readiness programs. But he's like, well, why don't I do one that's actually producing a product? That way it isn't just, you know what I mean? It's not just like educational money. So combine it, which makes a lot of sense. And I had a whole way. It would have been great. It would have been fantastic because you could have given them little ribbons and stuff, and they would have been like proud of their achievement. And then you have like titles for them and stuff, and they would have really liked, what I mean, that kind of thing. It works universally for people, but you need to have the staff to be able to do that. You need to bring in people from like there's a school, Johnson and Wales, that's a culinary arts school. You need to bring in people to show them knife skills and, give them like a seminar about it. And you need to pay those people, whatever. And we were running on a shoestring. So I really thought it was going to be a great thing. And I didn't even mind if he just took the whole thing over, because it would have been a much bigger, in a sense, product for him than just these granola bars, which was like a tiny. I mean, they had a budget of like $250,000 a year, but only produced $50,000 worth of granola bars. So there's a lot of support staff that he was paying that could have also worked with us. But we were bleeding pretty hard at that point, so I think he didn't want to touch us. Then at one point, so because he was a nonprofit, there was this school, Johnson and Wales, is a culinary arts school. So they invited him to go to this huge building that they were demolishing because it was outdated. And it was loaded with food equipment, right? Like huge pizza ovens, all kinds of stuff. And they were like, come grab what you want, because we're just going to demolish the whole thing. Because as a culinary arts school, they don't really pay for their equipment. The equipment manufacturers like give it to them because they want the students to become familiar with, like, I don't know if you know, like Viking, all the like high end kind of stuff. So for them, it's just like, well, it's all going to get thrown out. So he's like, oh, well, you should come with me and see if there's anything you want for the restaurant, which was nice of him. So we went to go visit, and he got a couple of little things for his granola thing. And I said to the guy who was running it on behalf of Johnson & Wales, I was like, so all this is just going to get thrown away? He's like, yeah. And I was like, what if I just took it all? Because the idea was like, well, we'll get nonprofits to like pick here and there. I was like, what if I just take it all, get it off your hands? He's like, great. I don't want to deal with all these people coming here, and it's all going to get thrown away. So I had a huge Penske truck, that I got, and I got a warehouse, put up shelving. It was crazy. All had to be done within a couple of days. And we got all these Ethiopians together, and we just took everything we could. We didn't know what the hell it was. Everything, piece of equipment we could, loaded the van up, dropped it off at the warehouse, loaded it up again, dropped it off the warehouse until the guy was just like, okay, that's enough. Get the fuck out of here. And we were like, okay, I don't even know what this shit is. And then Grace and I inventoried it, and I was like, when you look this stuff up, it's like, holy shit, is this? We had a gelato maker. It was like $50,000. We had like a donut maker. It was like a $40,000. You know what I mean? Like this very specialized equipment. Hardly got used. And I put it all on eBay. And it was shenanigans. The place was a shithole that we rented from because I didn't have really a lot of money. The guy let me use his forklift, and I broke a lot of stuff there, and he wasn't happy about that. But but it was a godsend because, you're supposed to pay state taxes like 7% of everything you sell, but they only collect it from you at the end of the month or the quarter or something. And we were like 30 grand behind. And the guy who was from the revenue service was like, I'm not letting you be open next month unless I get this. So I was like, oh, this is perfect, if I can sell this stuff. So I put it all on eBay. I initially put it on Craigslist and no one wanted it because it was so like, who wants a gelato maker, right? But you put it on eBay, boom, I get a guy in Canada, who's like going to give me $12,000 cash for it. I like wrapped the shit up in mattresses, just freighted it the hell out of there, and we made the payment, like it was a godsend. So that, Keith knew about it because he was the one, so he knew I was strapped for cash. But eventually he started to say like, well, you've got to give me half of everything you sell. And I was like, dude, I got to make this payment or I'm out of business like next week. So I would lie to him and say like, okay, yeah, definitely. I'm keeping track of it. And when it's all done, I'll pay you back. Right. And he eventually could see he wasn't getting paid and I have no qualms about it because look, of course my family's my top priority. I don't care about but he wanted to like hire a lawyer to do all the nonprofit stuff just like perfectly. He took me up to New Hampshire once for a weekend for like a conference for like entrepreneurship at like the Stonyfield Farm Yogurt. You ever seen that? Like the really high-end yogurt. Anyway, the guy who like started that company had this. But he did everything with like conferences and professionals and all this kind of stuff. And I don't think I think he came to realize, but like I didn't have that kind of money or that kind of time, to do this stuff. As much as I think that's like kind of good, but he was like a kind of big, he had 30,000 foot kind of guy, and he's like, before he does anything, he's going to talk to 10 lawyers and 5 consultants. So eventually I was just selling the shit, and I was like, well, he'll get whatever he gets at the end, because I paid, I'm the one who made it happen. So, and then we can talk, right? But he got pissed. And I actually remember the day there was like 2 Russians who were coming up from Long Island to get something that like Subway, it can toast bread, but it's like a microwave at the same time. Anyways, they were like, okay, $1,500, we'll be there today. And I knew Keith was going to like kind of like fuck me over, and I was trying to hide these purchases from him. So he talked to the landlord who locked me out. And I was like, to the Russians, I was like, sorry, this. And then what did he end up doing? He ended up losing everything in there, didn't sell another thing himself. And the landlord just took it over, which sucked because, at least we could have at least someone could have benefited from it. So I was kind of pissed at him, but I understand why he wanted control. And I did kind of tell him we're like partners, but I really was going to prioritize. Obviously, you know what I mean? Like, how are we going to have a partnership if this is out of business? So it's not like I was taking the money and going gambling with it. I was like really trying to sell. He never sold any of it. I sold it really hard. Grace actually helped me a lot of times selling it. I sold tons and tons of stuff. It was through him that I got access to the stuff, but whatever. So it ended up being kind of like a bitter parting of ways. But he never would have been able to do it. He just, I don't know. Sometimes someone can see something and be like, okay, I get how you're rolling here and I can work with you. Other times it's like, I just do things in a totally different way, and you're never going to get like the situation I'm in unless you've got like $1 million. And then I would have been happy if you just bought me out of it. But, I think he thought I was in a better position than I was in. So
ask you, you said your restaurant was already working with a program that was doing things to help immigrants. Were you part of that as part of like the workforce placement?
No, we never got any money. I mean, I just knew them. Like, so they're an agency.
Okay.
So when I had been a landlord, they had given me tenants. And so it was good because the government paid their rent initially, so you didn't have to worry about like collecting rent from them. On the other hand, you had a lot of problems, like, and they were nice people, and this was like a tough neighborhood. They were nice people, but you'd have these bizarre like cultural problems. Like I remember once that we had a woman from, I think she was from Eritrea, where there was a civil war, and leading up to like July 4th, she was like, they are shooting, there's war here, and I was like, what are you talking about? I went over there, and it's firecrackers. Right. And she was like, she was legitimately thinking like it's a war zone. Then I had like 2 women from different, one was Muslim and one was, I think, Eritrean again. But the Muslim woman, like they were yelling at each other. I couldn't understand what was going on. Neither of them spoke any English. At one point, one of them is like, she makes stinky. And I was like, what are you talking about? Right. And she's like, she puts it in the fridge. And I was like, what? And then she would point to her anus and be like, yeah, it comes from here.
Manar?
It wasn't Manar. And she's inviting men over. The Muslim was like, she invites men over, and that's not part of my culture. I was like, well, I don't know what to tell you. I'm not, you gotta. So eventually happened is that like the other woman had a stool sample that she had refrigerated, as a medical thing. And the other woman, I was like, okay, guys, I don't know. So each of them wanted their own toaster and their own refrigerator and locked doors. And, I was just like, that kind of stuff. But they were generally nice people, but, you have all these cultural issues. So I wasn't a huge fan of the whole thing by the end of it. And I was, I think immigrant people are interesting, but they're exhausting to deal with. And all the refugee, like the people who worked with them also, they were kind of, once you got to know them, they were like, these fucking people suck. You have to be, and they would always tell me, you're too nice of a guy. You need to be hard with them, which is interesting, you know, and I think they were right because they'll fleece you. They're just, they're poor people who are used to scrapping. So they'll, you know, they see every American as like just an ATM to hit up. So you have to be hardened that way.
A brief intermission really quickly. Brief intermission. I just wanted to thank...
Grace is intermitting.
I wanted to thank South to West, Answer Damage, Joe Shabatoni, Extreme, and Mock Lavelle for gifting a sub each. We do have a donor goal of 15 subs for the interview, and we're going to keep going until 8:30. So please subscribe, donate if you enjoy the content so far.
It would be really interesting if you could ever get Grace's mother to do an interview because I don't think she would disagree with me very much about the experience. And but who knows? I don't know. Apparently, she sees things differently than she used to. But I do think she really, I couldn't give her more kudos as a worker. And, you know, when I think about that, I'm like, yeah, I'm legit amazing. Because she hung with it well past when or really anyone else. And the greatest thing she did is she worked so hard making the bread that she developed carpal tunnel syndrome. You know what that is? Like where your tendons kind of go in. And so we were able to apply it at the end when the restaurant closed for workers' comp because you pay into the system. And accidentally they were going to pay us 10. They accidentally paid us $20,000. And the lawyer is like, yeah, you're supposed to give that back, but if you don't, what are they going to do, right? But don't apply for workers' comp again. And we were like, okay, fine, we'll keep the 20 G's. So, and I remember hearing at the workers' comp, like in the office, they were like, she was like a legend. They were like, she made like 20,000 loaves of bread. And it wasn't really bread, but someone was saying like, she made like 20,000 loaves of bread. My God. And so, you know, she did though. She did make that many, probably.
I was just going to see, when did you know like that the nonprofit was, did it kind of just fade once the health inspector issue came and you guys had kind of moved on? Was it kind of always open, or did you know there was a time like it wasn't going to happen?
No, when Keith locked me out, I knew that was it. You know, because he kind of felt like I was a criminal at that point, which, I mean, I technically hadn't signed anything with him. So it was like kind of trust. And he was, I don't know how to say it, like, I don't know how. It's tough to negotiate with someone when they don't really they're thinking in kind of like, he was a Yale graduate. He was from a rich family. He kind of understood that things are done a certain way, slowly and with planning. So if you meet someone who's like up to their neck in shit, you know, trying to dig out of it, they're just not going to be able to like roll with like doing things slowly. So, I mean, I think his granola project is still going on. You can look it up online. But he's the type of guy that would spend like 5 weeks developing like one graphic on a website, you know what I mean, to make it just perfect. And because his business was so small, I guess he could afford to do that. And he would spend a ton of time trying to get grants and things like that, which is important to do, but I was just trying to keep the doors open. If I had the chance to do it all over again, before I would have even started in on it, I would have partnered up with him, you know, and then probably would have been fine. But I think it would have taken him 20 years to like get the first dish on the plate, you know.
This is him, right?
Yeah.
It's like a OPC Don could put on a disguise and pass as this guy, I think.
He's a nice guy, you know, but he's like very frail and sort of, I don't know. When I went to this like conference with him, so every night he has to put on like biofeedback. He's got all this like, he looks like a mummy almost to get to sleep. And I was like, dude, what is all this? He's like, it's biofeedback to help me calm my nerves. He's like, my parents weren't very good to me. You know what I mean? And I was like, what? So, anyways, kind of a nice guy though. It's just like culturally was just like a mistake.
Yeah, he does look like George Costanza a little bit.
Costanza. I mean, you can hit him up. He just didn't get how I was rolling.
Did you tell him your nickname for him?
Queef Cooper.
Sorry about that.
You know, it was a shame because it could have made some sense, but you needed someone with deep pockets to like make the whole thing work. And they could have made it all work, but you know, it just wasn't a thing. And then I think also like like having a young family and my stuff with Courtney wasn't really making any sense at that point. So like she wasn't a particularly good partner to have, although I could never done it on my own. It's just a lot of things kind of made it fall apart. And but I do think the hand of God was in it. Like, it's so weird that I met these Ethiopians, that I had this money right at the time there was a place I could get, you know, and I don't see those as terrible years, even though in some sense the kids got neglected. It was kind of fun for them to meet people of a different culture, to eat. The food was delicious for them. It was a really healthy diet. And we spent a lot of time with them, like during lunch. You know, the kids were with us. So we were supposedly homeschooling them at that time, and we really weren't. So eventually, we sent them to school. And you know, it was a very chaotic time, but I think it had its good points.
What would you say, like, the overall legacy you would like the restaurant to have?
Overall legacy. You know, now it's actually it was taken over by, so this is the guy, he wanted us to come back after it closed. He was like, I'll clean it all up. And I was like, can you own it? He's like, no way. So they actually got people from, you know, those people, the Uyghurs or something like that, the Muslims in China who are oppressed.
Uyghurs.
Yeah, the Uyghurs, actually, it's a Uyghur restaurant, which is weird. I've never been to it because I don't want to get like PTSD. But they basically just took it right over, and it's still there, I think. But I don't know what the legacy. I think a lot of people got a lot of really good food there. So I don't think there's really anything to be ashamed of. But financially, it just couldn't work. The restaurant business is a brutal business, and you have to be a certain type of person to make it. And, yeah, I don't know. I don't know how the kids feel about it. I don't know how their mother feels about it. But, I mean, I don't think I could ever do it again. It was crazy. But, you know, it makes YouTube feel like heaven, you know.
Down to convert the RV into a food truck at any point?
You know, I've always thought that Courtney could have a little calm little local place that serves Ethiopian food. I'm sure she'd get a lot of customers. You know, it wouldn't have to be in a central location because you'd be the only game in town. And just run it like as a counter front, you know, maybe Thursday, Friday, Saturday kind of thing. I think she could do well that way, but I think for her, it's kind of like, I don't know if you ever had an experience where you're like, you got so deep in something, you just don't want to be reminded of it. It's just a bad memory. I just never want to be reminded of it. That was her thing. I think about a lot of things, including me and Grace. So she's not one of those like, let's try it again type of people. But also I do understand, like, she literally like sacrificed everything for it. Not everything, but like, you know, she was all in. She was a trooper until the end. She never really like slacked off. She was a really good worker.
Can I ask you a question? I hate to butt in, but
no problem.
Wouldn't you say that mom would have made a great employee but a terrible wife / business partner?
Yeah, she's not like a manager type. But if you were working like a Wendy's or something, like she could single-handedly work at like if everyone called out, she would like be able to work the whole place, you know what I mean? And be very what's the word? Diligent about it. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or anything like that, where it's like just like repetitive work, hard work, even stressful. She's not like a you know, she's not going to just say like fuck it and leave. She can work under a lot of pressure, and I think she thinks she likes it. She likes that type of work. So
even now, she's working several jobs when she could live off welfare money.
Yeah,
with the kids she has in her custody.
They should hire her. You know, with that humanitarian fund thing where they got everyone shooting bullets at the Palestinians while trying to deliver them food. Like, she would be pretty good about just like keeping the Gazans like getting the food as the bullets whiz by her and the IDF is like grenading the place. I think she'd be like, no, we're getting the meals to these people. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
She'd be good in like a combat zone, strangely enough. I would hire her to do that. You know what I mean? Like if I was the IDF, I'd hire her to do that because she would also at a certain point probably take a machine gun and blow them all away herself out of frustration. But seems to be the way it goes over there.
Do you have any like stories or memories of like memorable encounters you had with customers? Like I'm like imagining, I think a lot of us have like imagined what you were like dealing with the customers.
Yeah.
Do you have any like stories that stand out?
I would talk to the customers a lot because I was trying to develop, you know, like return customers and things, but maybe I over talked sometimes, but I just found the culture fascinating. It was really it's a fascinating culture, ancient culture. It's half Muslim, half Christian, and they really get along well. It has like all these resonances with Judaism. The music is fascinating. The history is fascinating. I never learned the language or anything, but yeah, I remember one group of customers I was really trying to hope for was like to get like a hold of was at a certain point, you know, there are people who adopt kids. They can't, and American kids are very hard to adopt. Young kids, very hard to get babies who are like young, white, like would fit in with your family. So a lot of times people go abroad. And at a certain point, Russians were doing that until they found out like the Russian mafia was involved with it. And then they cut it down because they were basically selling kids. And that happened in Ethiopia too. And the same thing happened. It got shut down because they found that a lot of people were sort of selling their kids to give them a better life. And they really weren't orphans. But for a while, people really liked, I hate to say this, Ethiopian kids because they're sort of exotic looking. They don't look like black kids from West Africa. And it's sort of that Brangelina. Like, you know, they have kids who are diverse and stuff. So I hate to say it, but like if you're adopting foreign kids and you're a liberal white person, your Ethiopian kids are sort of like high on the tier list of like flexing your virtue signaling. So there was a bunch of these people who had Ethiopian kids. And I think like for good reasons, they wanted them to know more about their native culture because these people were all white people. And so these kids had been born, maybe spent a year or two in Ethiopia, and then they had adopted them. And they wanted them to, you know what I mean? They didn't want them to just be totally disconnected from their heritage. So they rented out a big like auditorium underneath a big Catholic church in Providence. And they had all these kids and their parents, and they would hire us to cater. And then I started getting a couple of our people to like, I wanted them all to have their names written in Amharic. So this one guy who could write Amharic, I gave him a calligraphy pen, you know, so he write all their names in Amharic and they could meet someone from their culture, etc. And then there's this one guy who was half blind and he played the keyboards. You remember that, Grace? You don't remember this?
Yeah, I know. I remember that guy.
But the idea is, guys, like it's entertainment. It's a kid's party, right? So they were the worst entertainers ever. And so the guy with the keyboards just mumbled. And I was like, they don't care if it's, you know, a real thing or whatever, but like he couldn't get the thing working. And then the guy doing the he had this line of 20 kids, and he would take like 40 minutes for each kid's name, talk to them. And the parents were kind of like frustrated, but I'm like, well, you know, if you really want to know what Ethiopian culture is like, this is what it's like, you know? So, and the kids, of course, didn't want the food. They just wanted hot dogs and chicken tenders. So all the white people ate, again, the Ethiopian food. All the Ethiopian kids just ate chicken tenders and hot dogs because the parents asked for the kids, you know, so it's ridiculous kind of thing. Anyways, that's about it. That's about as memorable as it got. Courtney had this like great friend. He was a super nice guy. He was a gay dude who lived nearby, and he was like a top, I guess, and his bottom would come over sometimes. Remember that guy?
Oh yeah, Mom loved him.
So she had her gay BFF who came almost like 3 times a week for lunch. He was a charming guy, loved the food, and they would bash gay culture together because he was kind of an anti-gay gay.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah. So
what the hell was his name? Kevin?
Kyle or something?
Colin? Something like that.
I forget. But he
guy,
was
right?
a hoot.
Fat guy.
Yeah, he was fat, and his boyfriend was skinny, and had been on some reality TV show, I think.
Boyfriend was a little grody.
Yeah. So they were really good friends. It was, you know.
Gross about it, right?
What's that?
What was gross about the guy?
Oh, he was just kind of like, I don't know, you know, and like skinny and like
AIDSy.
had a thick beard. I don't know, short.
I mean, he was, well, whatever.
But he was just more soft-spoken than the other guy.
Yeah.
Also, thank you for the subbies, Ashes, and Amsterdamage. Thank you, guys. And Mock Lavelle. Sorry, I didn't mean to get off the flow.
No problem.
Are you done with the...
Oh, can I tell you one more funny story? So a lot of, I knew of the Ethiopians, but also I had some folks from sub-Saharan Africa who were my tenants. And a lot of the men, when they come to America and they're not like young men, they just become alcoholics. Like they just can't deal with it. The women become kind of like aware that they have all these new rights and stuff. So the men often just end up just being drinkers, whether they were in the home country or not. So we would have these Ethiopian guys who would come up to the 3rd floor and just get shit-faced up there. But it was like not on me. I wasn't supplying with alcohol. But one time, this guy, I had no idea that when they were coming and going. It wasn't my job to oversee them. They were grown men. So one time this guy, he was barely there. And apparently he had come out the side street, and then it comes out onto Wickenden Street, which is still a small street. He managed to turn left, and he was so drunk that there were cars parked along the side. He managed to ride up the side of a car and end up with his car like this, and then he just called it right there. So he had this car like this in the middle of the road. So all these people were out there. By this time, there was, I think, videos and photographs, and the cops came and everything else. And they just got out of the car like in that situation, and they just didn't try to go any further. And the woman whose car it was they had rode up on had come in and started saying, "What? Go back to your home country if you can't drive." This is, this kind of stuff. And I was like, lady, it's kind of, and the cops were like, shit, how did that happen? How did that even happen? How do you ride up on a car? But, it was harmless. No one got harmed or anything, but she was like super irate. And I was like, you got to get out of here, because they started getting all like, hey, tribal, kind of like, we're not into this. So I was like, you got to get out of here. And it was just a typical kind of clusterfuck of a scene, from, that I got in the middle of. And I was like, I have no idea how this happened, why it happened, what to do now. But eventually they worked it out, and they always seem to find a way to end up back on their feet, and driving again.
They just kind of like bounce back. Whatever happens, they just move on.
They had a thing. One of the reasons perhaps they're not good drivers is, they're resilient. Like, they told me that. So you go in to take your driver's test, And of course, if you speak a different language, you get an interpreter, right? So the interpreter was someone they knew. So of course, who speaks Amharic? It's a very obscure language. So they told the interpreter what to say, and the interpreter would say it, and then in their language tell them the answer as well. Because who's going to know, right? If you add another couple of syllables in a language that no one's going to pay any attention to. So none of them actually passed the test. I mean, none of them actually ever even took the test. They just went in there, and the guy, they knew exactly the guy it was going to be. He had a job. He was making money. So this is the kind of thing. They didn't really have a lot of respect for like the rules. And you can understand that because like, whatever, fuck it, right? Like we're just trying to survive here. So that was another, they told me that and I was like, well, guys, that's not, you know what I mean? But like, I get it. What are you going to do? It's too easy to cheat in a sense, but it's one of those things, So I'm kind of like I'm not like a liberal when it comes to immigration, because it does have this side in which people can like be scumbags, but they were hard. They were good workers. They were not here just to like do drugs, and they never. One of the interesting experiences I had was when I was starting out and I was taking them home at night. I would just try to make conversation with them, help them with their English or whatever, but I'm just also biding the time and the guy I started the place with, Emmanuel, I was just talking with them about coming to America and how it was. And I was like, so how's your neighborhood? I was driving him to it and, at like 2 a.m. and it'd been a long night. And I was like, so, what are the good and bad parts about it? And he's like, yeah, I like to be in America, but I don't like the black people, and I was like, yeah, you're black, right? But like for him, no. Because you know what I mean? He felt like the black people were dangerous and they didn't, they did crime and things like that. So it's kind of a weird experience to be with someone that most of us would see as a black person saying like, I don't like black people. Yeah. It's culturally, you realize Africans and black people do not see each other as the same people.
Last thing I had for you, Ben, was there's kind of like maybe the most infamous review of the restaurant makes a mention to the fact that they waited 2.5 hours for a table in plain view of the owner. Now, were you that representative? Do you remember that visit?
I don't, but I'm not surprised. They waited 2.5 hours for a table. Yeah, because it must have been early on that we would have people waiting a long time. The problem that we had as a restaurant is we were a BYOB restaurant, which you didn't need any licenses for, bring your own alcohol. But that also makes people kind of camp out. And especially since we had the second floor, you couldn't see people were waiting on the second floor. So you'd have these campers who would just be there for 4 hours drinking wine, which we weren't making money off and had to provide like glassware for. So that was true of a lot of restaurants on that street because college kids don't want to go to a place where, you know what I mean? They will bring their own booze, get drunk, buy your food. And like, that's kind of the deal. You know what I mean? So, but a lot of times they would just be like there for the night. And if it's a Friday or Saturday night, some of the other restaurants would actually have the waiters go like, you've got to get out of here. Like, that's it. You've got to leave. And we never kind of really wanted to do that because I don't know. We were just like, kind of like, didn't want to be brutal. That it's hard to say like, how long do you get it? It's weird to get thrown out. You know what I mean? You really have to tell them ahead of time, like you got to finish within an hour or something like that. So that's probably what happened there. Eventually the waiters had what would happen is they'd give unrealistic times to kind of keep people there. Do you know what I mean? And you could see how a waiter would do that because they want the tip. But then that would piss the patrons off because they're like, you told me 20 minutes. You know what I mean? And I think most restaurants do give you a little bit unrealistic times. But they learned because the kitchen was so slow that like This isn't like working in another restaurant. It's going to be a long time. So eventually, but we also probably lost customers that way. I don't know. It's kind of one of those. It's one of those things. It's definitely. It sucks to have to wait, but I mean, if you're waiting, I don't know. It may have been that they just got there and they were waiting for 2.5 hours. I don't think we owe it to anyone to have a table for them. You see how many people are in front of you, you see how fast the line moves, and you make your decision. And it's a slow, I don't know. To me, that's very different than saying like I got sick off the food or like it was low quality or whatever. And there's only so much you can do in those situations. It's a good thing if people want to wait for your food, but I do understand that maybe a lot of times we're unrealistic or just shit happened in the back that shouldn't happen in a professional kitchen. But
anything else like you can think of as far as like any stories or memories or things you want to get on the record about the restaurant that we didn't cover?
No, I mean, I think when you read the reviews, they're mostly pretty glowing reviews, I think, right? There was very little...
Actually, in regard to the food, the food part of the reviews were really good. Service, was kind of hit and miss.
Yeah. It's too bad we couldn't...
And the one guy who said you were watching the Flintstones on an iPad, I don't know if that's true or not.
There were some people who complained because our kids would sometimes be there during the lunch service. Which I don't care because, like, to me, well, it's a family business, you know what I mean? And having kids there, I don't feel like, because we usually lost money during lunch because we had relatively small amount of customers. Some people felt like that was unprofessional, but like, I don't really care. So, I mean, I agree. The service, the whole setup could have been done much better if we had done it from the start. But I do think the key is the food. And if people didn't want to wait for a table, they could have gotten takeout. So I don't know how much tears I cry for that. It is what it is. We're a slow restaurant working with. If they fucking knew what was going on in the back, I think they would have appreciated it. It's tough to work with people from another culture, a very slow culture, who don't really understand the American fast. Another thing in their culture, even when it's not a refugee culture, it's insulting in a lot of Middle Eastern cultures to serve food quickly. They find it insulting, and it's more like the Italian thing where you like it's like a night, you know what I mean? So one course, then slowly bring out another course. So it was hard to get that translated to like East Coast, and also money making. You need to turn tables. But Grace, did you have any other thoughts?
What kind of pizza do we have here? Can we show the camera?
Hawaiian. Yummy.
I got a couple questions for you, Grace, if you want to answer them. Mm-hmm. Did you ever waitress at the restaurant?
Yeah, a lot.
What was that experience like?
I in fact had her, what do you call it? Stuff her bra.
Yeah.
To make her look older.
To
make her look older.
Yeah, somebody told me to bring that up, but I high and forgot about it.
Joe Shabatoni, give us a sub.
We got it covered.
Thank you, Joe Shabatoni. Thank you for the subbies. One more sub, and we hit the goal. Thank you, guys.
Did you see the slugs in the basement too?
Yes. My mom.
Like, how many slugs are we talking about?
I mean, it would be like 2 or 3 a day. They were kind of scary because they just kind of like snuck. Like you just be walking around and then you'd like reach into a shelf and then it'd be behind it and you'd be like. But when they were on the floor, my mom, she would just like she would be making the injera. You put it on you put this dough on a crepe plate and you sort of shift it around, and she would just take a thing of salt and spray it at them and then just keep cooking. But she would have me encircle them and trap them, and then I would get to like sprinkle the salt on top to make them die. It was very satisfying.
Wow.
Waitressing was tough at first. I dropped a lot of stuff on people. I dropped 6 glasses of water on somebody at my first table. So I was like, oh, I can do the tray. And then I lifted one off and it all went. People would interrogate me about how old I was. They'd be like, how old are you? And I was like 16. And they were like, are you sure? And I was like, yeah. Pretty awkward. But overall, it was a good experience. The other waiters would steal my tips, which was annoying.
Yeah, they were bad.
They were like, who steals a 13-year-old girl's tips? But they would.
They were scumbags.
I would get really annoyed at people who would tip like the change they paid cash to. And there would be some really annoying college kids late at night who would just get super drunk. But, you know, I felt like I handled it pretty well. I don't know.
The best 12-year-old waitress, Ethiopian waitress in America, I would say.
Yeah.
I think that's all I got, unless one of you two has anything else you wanted to add to it.
I would just say overall, thinking back on it, I kind of like in my head had it as like a pretty bad experience, but there were a lot of fun times. You know, it was a funny experience overall, I would say. I feel like it didn't have to be such a bad memory in everybody's heads as it was. It was pretty funny. I mean, we were just kids, so it was kind of like an adventure, and it's pretty funny overall. I don't know. Going to the restaurant depot and, you know, working with these African people, and the food was really good.
Gelato makers on eBay.
That was funny. I think me and my dad, like when we were in that warehouse together, we were subsisting almost entirely on like oatmeal cream pies.
Yeah, from the Price Right.
From the Price Right, and like or Fanta or Pepsi. So
we made crazy money though.
Yeah.
The guy running the warehouse, his name was David Spino, and he had this other guy with him who showed Grace once he had like sawed off his fingers or something, and then he replaced him with like
his
ass
tissue, so they looked like hot dogs.
It was crazy.
And I literally almost threw up. I ran out to the car and I got a migraine from it. It was probably also from the stress, but like I got a migraine. It was the first migraine I ever got. We
would have these like a pizza. You ever seen a pizza oven? It's like 9 feet tall, like 8 feet wide, 5 feet deep, weighs like 3,000 pounds. So how do you pack that, right? For transport. And I remember getting like an old mattress and then another old mattress, sandwiching them together and just running like that plastic stuff around it. And then the freight guy would show up. David would be like, I wouldn't accept that if it was sent to me. I was like, well, we'll see. Then the freight guy would show up like, what the fuck? And he's like, fuck it. Let's just get it on there. Bang it up there. And then we never had a return. But one guy with a pizza oven, he's like, oh, this doesn't fit in my doors. And I was like, well, I don't know what to tell you. I put the measurements.
Come on.
Yeah, you got to change your doors. You're not sending back a $5,000 pizza oven.
Replace your home, sir.
That was his fault.
No, but the prices were great. Compared to buying the stuff new, they got a great deal. But for us, since we didn't pay anything, it was all profit. So,
well, thank you for the interview. I appreciate it. I feel like we got a lot of lore. We have a pretty good definitive take, well, Ben's take on the restaurant and everything. I liked hearing all the stories, and I do think you guys had mostly like, I mean, that's some of the stories were, you know, weird or whatever, but I feel like it was mostly like a positive. It sounded like you had a lot of fond memories of the restaurant and your time being a part of it.
The whole thing to me was like one huge nightmare. Honestly, I don't know if you've ever experienced something that's so stressful that even when you're sleeping, you're dreaming it. It's like a 24-hour. It's crazy. It's just really, really stressful. But, you know, it's amazing people are pretty resilient. And when it ended, it took me a few months to, like, get things back on track.
Yeah.
And then I was like, well, you know, fuck it. It's America. Credit card companies, what are they going to do if I don't pay them?
Oh, another great moment.
What are they going to do? Kill me?
After the restaurant closed and my dad was very depressed, he briefly considered getting life insurance and then self-deleting. Not really, but briefly considered it.
Yeah, that was one of the...
And he brought it up to my mom, and she said, yeah, I considered you doing that too.
Oh my God! Wow.
So,
yeah. Okay, I guess that's a way you can answer that. I wasn't
Courtney
very
wins
serious.
again.
I just felt like, am I any use at this point?
Classic Courtney. I didn't know about that until much later, and I was like, what?
No, but that didn't
fuck?
surprise me or shock me at the time, which lets you know exactly where we were at that point. I'm supposed to be that
right, well,
oh my God, don't say that.
Right. Oh, honey, no. How could you ever say that? My kids need a father, and I love you. It's like, yeah, I thought about that too.
I'll help you arrange it, Cliff.
I'm going to go, but I appreciate you guys talking with me and sharing all of your memories and the lore about the restaurant. Hopefully Joe Shabatoni's happy with the...
Very happy. In
results,
fact, Joe Shabatoni, how about you round us off with the last sub of the night? How about it, buddy, huh? This is what you've been waiting for this whole week.
Well, we also want to say, Mark, thanks for all of the work you've done for free.
The clips,
all the clips you've done, and it's been fantastic. I do want to say we were hitting a little bit of a low point, but I think we're coming back out of the trough. So get those plans together for Fusion Studios.
Yes.
Fusion Studios, Naptown Studios, our first two projects once we emerge from utter poverty.
Bye, Mark. Yeah. Have a good night.
Bye. You too. See you later.
Yeah. How did we do, Grace?
We did well. Okay, Joe, I'll say subby. Can I please get one more subby? Please. No, Joe Shabatoni gifted 1 sub. Stephen David gifted 1 sub, and Ryler gifted 1 sub. Let's go. We'll end the stream with a little bit of a mukbang and some Ethiopics to really bring the trauma all the way back. It was one of these kind of things, right?
Yeah, it was definitely one of those.
What do
they do? They do this kind of thing? Thanks for the subbies. That takes us to 12 out of 10. Thanks, guys. I want the one that's more upbeat. These have some really spicy ones. Oh yeah, this brings back the memories. No, not this one. Very loungy. I can smell it. Oh my God, just literally played this one. Who do you guys want me to send you to? Merc? Merc has 87. I'm going to send you to Merc off to Perk. Bye.